2025. Oops. Okay, today is Wednesday, January 8th, 2025. This is our first meeting of the Charter Review Commission for 2025. Chair will acknowledge the presence of a quorum and ask that the record reflect the names of the members who are in attendance today. We are starting off with a guest speaker. We're having some connection problems. This is our first all virtual meeting by Zoom. We will wait for him to get connected. In the meantime, let's see, why don't we just approve the agenda? Does anyone have any proposed changes to the draft agenda that was previously circulated? There is Evan.
I'll move it.
You'll move it?
Second. I'll second.
Okay, not hearing any opposition, we will consider the agenda adopted by unanimous consent. And our first item of business is our speaker, Councilmember Evan Glass, who's graciously agreed to join us here today to talk about some of his ideas that the Charter Commission might study in the next 2 years. And then we'll have a short question and answer session and let him get on with his day. So I will thank him in advance and turn it over to Councilmember Glass.
Well, thank you very much, Chair Michaels. Jim, good to see you. Good to see everybody here. I appreciate you, Howie. Nice to see you too. Happy New Year, everybody. This is probably my first formal council related meeting since you are an official, one of the most official commission of the county. You know, we have about 95 different boards, committees, and commissions, and the Charter Review Commission, because of the important work that you do, is certainly at the top of that. You are mandated by our charter, and so I appreciate all of you serving in this capacity and wanting to make sure that Montgomery County remains a great place and make sure that our charter and subsequent rules are able to accommodate that and support that. So thank you very much. And you know, the work that you do is also really important to me because Chair Michaels has invited me here this morning, as he has in the past, because you know, I'm a student of government, a student of history, and I love just asking questions about how we can always do better. And you know, whether they are questions about the U.S. Constitution or questions about the Montgomery County Charter, they are all interrelated because they are our governing documents, and make sure that we have not only peaceful transfers of power, but also that we have processes that are applicable to the current year, 2025, not just 200 years ago or more. And so thank you all for that work. And for those of you who don't know me, not only am I an at-large council member serving in my second term, but prior to serving on the council and getting involved in local government, I was a journalist at CNN for 12 years, and I covered Congress and presidential campaigns. And so that's where my curiosity and love of asking questions originates. And so once again, thank you very much for having me this morning. I don't have a whole lot to present because again, I'm here at the invitation of you all. And so short of my comments just now, I'm happy to open it up for any Q&A, any questions that you might have related to charter questions or anything else that is happening in our large 500 square mile jurisdiction with 1.1 million people. I will note that it is a busy day. I might not be dressed for the occasion right now, but I will be heading over to Annapolis, where it is the start of our legislative session. And there's a lot of important work that the governor, our state senate, and House of Delegates will be doing as well, as Howie Dennis knows very well. So with that, I'll just turn it over to you, Chair Michaels, and open it up for a conversation for however long we can.
Okay, thank you. I think, as you suspect, I did have a few topics. Our group has already started to consider topics for our next report, and we've got, I think, 3 topics on our list that we've been discussing for a couple of months, and one that I wanted to bring up because it was something I believe you raised when you spoke to us a year and a half ago. So let me start with that one because it may or may not be topical. At the time, you were in the process of filling the position of the executive director for the council, who was retiring after many, many years. And you mentioned to us that the Office of Legislative Oversight, OLL, had been historically independent and not under the stewardship of the executive director of the council. And you questioned whether that was something that should be reconsidered, but then asked us not to take it up while you were still in the process of filling that position and trying to get reorganized. So we did put it aside. But I wanted to start by asking you whether you think that is something, now that you've got an executive director that's permanent, whether you think that is something we should consider and look at, or whether it's something you think the council itself could best address through its own internal process, either policy, rules, or legislation.
Thank you, Jim, for bringing that up. And yeah, in the 6 years that I've served on the council, I have found that there are plenty of opportunities for us to update our processes and procedures, make internal reforms. I'll give you some examples. It was in 2020 that when I introduced a charter amendment to expand the size of the council from 9 members to 11 members. And the reason I made that proposal back in 2020 was because the 9-member council had been in place for 30 years. Before then, it was 7 members. Before then, it was 5 members. But for the previous 30 years, it was 9 members. And during that time, our county's population grew from approximately 500,000 people to 1 million people. And so I said, as the county has grown so substantially, we need to increase the size of the council for better representation and to support democracy. And what has transpired when 2/3 of Montgomery County residents supported that proposal, we now have 11 members, and we now have the most diverse council we have ever had. And that is a true testament to our county, and it is true representation. And then once the 11 members of this council came on board and I was elected president, I started speaking with them, or before I was elected president, I started speaking with them in anticipation of becoming president. And I said, we're going from 9 members to 11 members. What internal changes can we make to accommodate this? And I started speaking with people about creating a brand new committee at the council. We talk a lot about economic development here in Montgomery County. It's on a lot of people's minds, but we have a lot of different thoughts about what economic development is. Does it mean attracting Fortune 500 companies? Does it mean changing our wage scales? Or does it also mean making sure that there is generational wealth being able to be conveyed among our very diverse community? And I'd say it's all of the above. But we did not have a place at the council to have those deeper conversations. So I worked with my colleagues and created a brand new committee, the Economic Development Committee. And then once I created that committee, it became the most popular committee, and it is now the largest committee on the council with 4 members. I share all of that as background because there's always ways to update, modernize, and reform. And one of the ideas that I've had over the years was making our internal processes better. There is a split within the legislative branch, within the council. We have an executive director who we recently appointed, Craig Howard, who was the deputy director for a number of years, to be our executive director, who runs the operations and administration of the council. We also have a side department called the Office of Legislative Oversight. For those of you who are familiar with the federal government and how Capitol Hill works, it's akin to the Congressional Research Service. We ask them questions, they do deep dives and produce reports, which are all online. And those reports help guide us in our legislative and oversight functions. And I think it is incredibly helpful. But they are 2 distinct subgroups. Right, 2 different leadership, 2 different leaders within the body, and I've thought that as we have 6 committees at the council, there should be better integration. And one of the ideas is to better integrate the legislative functions under one leader. and not have it bifurcated between the council administration under the executive director and the Office of Legislative Oversight over another director who's his name is Chris, and he's fantastic as well. And the people who work at the Office of Legislative Oversight are great. They're whip smart and they produce incredible reports. But there could be better integration. And if we think about how committee structure on Capitol Hill or in Annapolis or other bodies work, there's usually some of that research component, that forward-looking component, the analysis, and that's what combining these two things would do. Now, the second part of your question, Chair Michaels, about who would advocate for this. This is really internal under the hood, an under the hood conversation. I venture to guess that nobody outside the council, let alone most of you, are very familiar with this structure. But I have been told, and I know Christine Wellens is on here, I've been told that it is a charter question. Do I think that the council should have, the lead in this discussion? Yes, it is ultimately my colleagues who would think that the system is working fine or not working fine. And I wouldn't want you all to spin your wheels to work on something that the council ultimately would not adopt. I'll say that as we start this new year and this new charter review session, I would encourage you all to find things that a majority of the council members will support, because otherwise it's a quixotic quest over the next year and a half or so to find policies and potential amendments that the council would not adopt, as what happened, last year or so. And so those are my thoughts about the Office of Legislative Oversight. I'm always looking for improvement. I'm a reformer at heart. But this is some real fine-grained stuff, and those are my thoughts there.
Thank you. I have one quick question. Does the OL have sort of the job of recommending policy decisions, or is it really strictly research? They take no policy view. They don't make a recommendation.
That's a great question. So I'll give you this most recent example. Last year, Councilmember Kate Stewart, who's now the president, and I commissioned a report for the Office of Legislative Oversight to look at the county's campaign finance law, right? It was passed back in 2013, I believe, 2014. It was actually passed in 2014 and took effect in 2018, but it's 10 years old and there had not been many major updates to it. And so we asked Office of Legislative Oversight to take a look at the campaign finance law and share with us a landscape analysis. How are other jurisdictions implementing campaign finance? What are the dollar amounts? How do they make it fair to have elections? And so they came back, Office of Legislative Oversight, having done an analysis of New York and DC and other jurisdictions in the state of Maryland and other cities across the country. And there were a few different aspects that they shared. They said that inflation, the inflation numbers had not been updated in the law, right? So that was first and foremost, that while 10 years of having figures in the law of how much money could be matched and so forth, they had not been updated for inflation. Then they also said that they had done an analysis of traditional financing in traditional campaigns, and they said that there was a 24-to-1 discrepancy between people and campaigns in traditional financing and those in public financing. Put it another way, there was a 24-to-1 disadvantage, and that was based on their own analysis. So Office of Legislative Oversight came up with some recommendations to close that gap and to make it more fair for the year 2024, 2025, and beyond. And we adopted those recommendations. And now, by their own analysis, the updates that we made closed the discrepancy from 24-1 to 12-1. So it's closer, but there's still a large discrepancy. All of that is to say that they did a deep analysis, which is public. You can read it online. It's a really good report. And they provided a roadmap for improving the system. And we ended up adopting that. So they traditionally, it depends on the report. Some will provide very specific guidelines or recommendations. Others will provide all of the information and not provide any recommendation, allowing the either council members or the legislative analyst staff to make recommendations on their own.
Okay, thank you.
Is that helpful?
Yep, it is very helpful. So does anybody else have any questions before we go on to the next topic?
Hey, Jim, I have a question for Councilmember Glass. Councilmember Glass, this is Mike Persh. Yeah, sorry, my camera doesn't seem to be working, so I'm dialing in. Personally, I greatly appreciate you coming to the commission meeting. You came last year and it was greatly appreciated. I think, as you said, we got about 1.5 years of experience under our belt. Last year, we concentrated on trying to make the budget process perhaps a little bit more efficient. We looked at number of votes required. I think it was section 305 we concentrated in on, and it didn't get anywhere basically. But I think the commission learned a lot in going through that process. I think we demonstrated that as a commission we could be very effective. We did a lot of research. We published a report. Hopefully it was helpful and thoughtful. It was certainly carefully done. Jim, it gets a lot of the credit. He did the final editing of it. Anyway, it was a good process, a very thoughtful process for us as a commission. But of course, it didn't get council support. So my question to you, basically, as we get started, looking at the next 1.5 years, what you recommended basically that we don't pursue things that are not going to find support in the council. Yet, in my reading of transcripts of council meetings, et cetera, and listening to you today, I'm getting the sense that you're basically pretty satisfied with the way things are going, and you don't see, personally, and maybe you haven't focused in on it, it's a brand new year and the like, but you don't see topics for us to consider for charter amendments at this point in time. And so my question, I guess, is how would you suggest we proceed? Should we ask Kate, council member, or Council President Stewart to join us? And should we be talking to the county executive, do regional outreach?
Yeah.
Is that the way to go at this point? Or take a vacation for the next 6 months?
No, don't take a vacation. And I appreciate the question, Mike. And so let me clarify my statement a little bit more, right? You all have a very important function, and it is to ask questions and to try to propose policy ideas that can be incorporated in the charter and help our local government, whatever that means, right? You want to improve the way our county functions and operates. And so, which is why it is a bipartisan commission, because that can be interpreted in various different ways. I think there is an important function at the very onset to asking questions and to engaging in this process. And I think that is very helpful, because the ideas that you brought forth even last year even if they were not adopted by the council, sparked conversation. And I think that's healthy. It's good for us to think about whether or not budget increases, revenue changes should be done unanimously or should be done with a supermajority. And that sparked a really good conversation in a lot of the circles in which I'm invited to speak. And so I would not view that as a loss at all. I think you did a good thing. Now, you all can interpret that differently. You could potentially view it as spinning your wheels, that we worked so hard on this. We wrote this report. We engaged a lot of people, and we thought this was the current policy of unanimity was not right or fair, and so we wanted to do this, but the council let us down. I could understand if that is an interpretation and a sentiment, because others have felt that way. I know others who've served on the Charter Review Commission over years and decades, and when their proposals had not been adopted by the council and put onto the ballot, they felt it was a great loss. And so because of those mixed emotions, I would encourage you to engage the county executive and engage the council. And yes, you should very much invite Council President Stewart to a future meeting to gather her thoughts, but also to ask her thoughts about things that you are ruminating on, because ultimately you will need a majority of the council to support any of the efforts that you put forward. But even if the council does not support those efforts and put them on the ballot, I still think the work that you're doing is incredibly important, and it sparks conversation, because all of you come from different groups. You're from different political parties. And even within the political parties, you are on different, different sides of that spectrum, which is a wonderful thing. And you should bring those perspectives and those ideas to the Charter Review Commission for discussion.
Okay, I appreciate that. I have thoroughly enjoyed working on the commission, and I don't think it was. I think it was a good exercise. Obviously you don't want to spin your wheels, but I think I do have one other question. You will receive the county executive's budget in the next week or so. Do you have any thoughts about possible charter related changes prior to receiving the county executive's budget, or are you do you want to see what he has, what he's going to recommend, to see what issues might arise based upon?
So Mike, next week, in the next week or so, we will be receiving the county executive's proposed capital budget, and that's for infrastructure. The operating budget has a March 15th deadline for introduction. So there are two different budgets that the executive submits. I know that the operating budget is a date set in the charter. I'm not sure about the capital budget, to be honest, when that is set, whether it's by law or by charter. But there have been conversations about the March 15th deadline as set in the charter for the operating budget. The conversations I've been a part of are essentially this. The governor introduces his budget, I think also by January 15th or within the next few weeks. And so as the state works on their budget, we also then begin work on our budget shortly thereafter. And how do we reconcile those two things, especially in this legislative environment where the state is facing a nearly $3 billion budget shortfall. And we expect them to make some changes, both reducing the budget of some agencies and departments. They will probably be adjusting the fees and potentially taxes in some areas. And I also believe they will be passing some costs down to the counties, which means we have to take on additional burden from the state, not to mention any additional burden that we might need or have in our own operating budget. And so balancing what might be coming from the state with what we have in our own backyard at our own budget, that is a very tough juggling act. And it has been suggested that we delay the introduction of the operating budget by even 2 weeks or more, so that we have a better picture of what's coming out of Annapolis, and that we have the best revenue estimates, because the comptroller sends revenue estimates that basically help us understand what our property taxes are, what our income taxes are, and that helps with the revenue aspect of the budget. Now, the flip side is if you were to delay the introduction of the budget, that means you have less time for the council to do its oversight and review, because we are required to pass a budget and have it go into effect by July 1st. And so if you do a work back schedule, July 1st is the beginning of the fiscal year in the state of Maryland. So all counties do that as well. And it means that we have the month that we basically have to get everything ready in June to get all the money allocated so that we hit the ground running on July 1st, which means that we have to approve the budget basically by Memorial Day. So the executive and finance department and all the other departments have a month to get ready for the start of the fiscal year. And so if we were to delay, if you're following this timeline, if we were to delay the introduction of the budget by a few weeks, it then condenses the timeline for the council to do review. Is that a better trade-off? I think it's a good question to ask about having a better numbers from the state of Maryland and a better understanding of what their budget is to inform our budget. But I do believe that the council does a very good job of oversight, a very good job of reviewing our budget. And I would have some concerns about what a condensed timeline in the council chamber would mean.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
There are two areas, if you're going to be able to stay with us a little while longer, there are two areas our members have raised that I want to give you a chance to address.
Right.
One was raised by Mike himself, and it has to do with the Maryland state law authorization for the county to create special taxing districts. I guess what's been noticed is the charter itself has no provisions pertaining to special taxing districts. And I think the question Mike has raised, and he'll correct me if I've got it wrong, is whether or not there should be provisions in the charter that specify when and how that existing authority should be used. Did I get that right, Mike?
Oh, you did, but perhaps now is not the best time to discuss this. Yeah, Evan, Council Member Glass, I'm kind of deferring to you, but we had planned to get some input from the county executive staff. They've talked about changing, quote unquote, restructuring some various taxes and suggesting that restructuring in Montgomery County, and it might include some beefed up provision for special taxing districts. And so I don't know whether you've had time to focus in on it, or perhaps you can give us at a high level what your thoughts are on it, or we could table it for now and revisit.
No, I can talk about it. As chair of the transportation committee, the county executive and I have had lots of conversations about to improve our transportation infrastructure, and the county executive is not shy in speaking about special taxing districts as they have in Northern Virginia, where there is an increased tax or a dedicated tax on commercial or other properties, and those funds are used directly for transportation investment in that area. And I think it's a noteworthy goal, right? It is working in Northern Virginia. I guess the question is whether or not we would need a charter amendment to accommodate that. I'm not sure that a charter amendment is necessarily needed, because what is actually required is a state law, the state to grant us that additional authority in some respects. And the county executive, I know, has spoken with our legislative leaders. He has spoken with the governor. He's spoken with me and other colleagues about how to make this happen. And then it's just a matter of the legislative process working its will. And so I think that the structure of special taxing districts is already allowed by the state. They just need to provide extra clarity as to where they would be created and defined. And then the council just needs to support it, the council and the county executive. You might recall that former county executive Ike Leggett, back in 2012, maybe, or somewhere right after the recession, wanted to create special taxing districts, I believe, for bus rapid transit. And that ended up hitting some speed bumps, so to speak, in Annapolis. But he started that process. It is a laid out process. It is a political one. And so I'm not sure what a charter amendment would necessarily do. But it's worthy of you continuing to investigate that.
Okay, thank you. It sounds like you have an open mind about it. If things come, if the argument is persuasive that a charter amendment might be most desirable way to go.
I have an open mind about almost everything, right? As a former journalist, I start with a place of curiosity. And what I really appreciate about the Charter Review Commission is you have that same mindset. And we are all coming into this conversation figuring out how to make our government better. And I'm always open for a conversation.
Thank you. Okay, great.
The second topic we're taking a look at has been raised by Commissioner Naftal, and Jeffrey is here with us this morning as well, and he can chime in. But it has to do with Charter Section 310, I believe. It's 310. That says that the council can accumulate an unappropriated surplus in any of its funds. And then it says, with respect to the general fund, the surplus should not exceed 5% of the fund's revenue for the preceding fiscal year. I think the question that Jeffrey has raised is whether the specification of 5% is a sufficient number, whether the charter should specify a larger surplus is permitted, and whether or not it should also mandate a minimum amount. And Jeffrey, I'll let you chime in and see if I get that correct.
No, you got that correct. The state has a higher minimum mandate. A lot of the bigger counties have higher minimum mandates. Rule of thumb when I worked in cities was always that you wanted to try and have 2 or 3 months worth of reserves, because you never know what's going to happen. And I worked in Florida where all kinds of good things could happen. And so, my thought is 5% seems really low for a county our size with the things we have going on in our county. It appears there's some kind of unofficial policy that we're working on that goes to 10%, but I can't find that actual written down anywhere. And if the charter is specifying 5% and we want to go 10%, we probably ought to think about adjusting the charter to go to 10%. So that's where I was coming from. I prepared a whole lovely spreadsheet with all the counties in the state and the state's minimums, and some of the smaller counties even have bigger minimum mandates than we have, which is just interesting. So
I didn't read it as a minimum. I read it as a maximum, which is another interesting point. But go ahead.
Some of them are maximums, yeah, and some of them are minimums. But the idea being that you want to try and get your reserves up to a point where if something, God forbid, happens really bad, you've got the funds to continue moving forward until things get straightened out. So.
A really interesting point, and definitely an important one as we enter this budget season. This is a nice dovetail off of the last topic. So there is a goal that we have in the county, and a goal that we have achieved over the last 5 years, and that is to have a 10% reserve. The reserve level of 10% came after the Great Recession. Clearly, there is this line in the charter that you've identified, that there is a baseline. And then after the Great Recession, our bond agencies, Wall Street, essentially said, we want you to increase those reserves if something were to happen again. And that you, as you noted, Jeff, could continue paying the bills. And most importantly, maintain a AAA bond rating across the three agencies, which Montgomery County has done for decades. We are the longest, if not one of the longest leaders in the country for a county to have a AAA bond rating. And that allows us to borrow and bond at a lower interest rate, thus saving our taxpayer dollars. So that's why the reserve is really important. We hit that 10% mark, I believe, in 2019 or thereabout, because it took a number of years to go, I think, from 5%, as you've identified, up to 10. So we're there. The question for you is whether or not you'd want to codify that in the charter. The question I have is, if this were to be codified in the charter, what is the flexibility should we enter another recession to draw down those reserves, right? And that is a technical question, it's a legal question, it's a finance question. But the whole purpose of these reserves is to draw down on them if they are needed. Here's another real world example. Because our real estate taxes, our property taxes, have been so incredibly strong over the last few years, which is a whole different conversation about why they are strong. Yes, it's because we are a desirable place, but also it's a supply and demand issue. We don't have enough housing, and thus the housing that we have keeps getting inflated pressure, and that's what's driving the assessments. I'm sure at least 1/3 of you have gotten your assessments from the state over the last week, and those are going from 20 to 35% in most cases, so large increases. But I digress. So because of all of those, because of the good revenue system, the revenue numbers that we have achieved, when the budgets have been introduced, we are actually at 12 and 13% reserves. And so the question for the county executive and the council has been, how far do we draw that down? And over the last year, we've been slightly above 10%, hovering around 10%. But we do get into debates at the council about 10.9% going down to 10.3%, making sure that there's a cushion, because throughout the year there are always budgetary demands for items that are not allocated in the budget, and those come from our reserves. The most recent obligation that we passed was for our services to end and prevent homelessness. I think it was about $5 million, give or take, and all of those monies came from our reserves. And so we were able to allocate that while still maintaining that 10%. So reserves are very important. And I would encourage you to do a little more due diligence and ask around as to whether or not mandating that 10% in the charter, what that means, because we are already doing that. It is in practice, and we can try to find where it is written or unwritten. Right? I know it's documented in lots of places, but probably not codified, which is the point that you're raising. And I think that is a worthy exercise for sure.
Thank you.
Jim, could I make a comment?
Sure, absolutely.
My name is Dave Natsheim. I'm a member of the board of a homeowners association. And the state of Maryland recently passed a law that requires homeowners associations to establish reserve funds, to do reserve studies, and to fund their reserves according to what the study tells them they need to have on hand to deal with the replacement of infrastructure, in essence, down the road. And it doesn't sound like our reserve, the county's reserve fund, has that specific goal, or maybe it does, I don't know. But it seems to me that what's good for the goose should be good for the gander, that if homeowners associations are supposed to fund their reserves at 100%, that the county should have a similar obligation. We're understanding that you have the reserve in order to be able to spend it when the need arises, because you've planned out when that need will arise. You determine how long something useful lifespan it will be and when you're going to need to replace it. And you therefore plan to have the funds available at the time when it occurs that the replacement has to happen. And that the law was passed partly as a result of that condo collapse in Florida, where the people had not funded for replacement and improvement of the building, and it collapsed, killed a lot of people. And I'm in favor of having reserves, but I think that 5% is not enough.
Yeah, so thank you for that, David. The reserve, the HOA reserve law is a state law. The county actually does not have any jurisdiction over the legal requirements of common ownership communities like HOAs. Those are all state laws, and so that was passed in Annapolis. With regard to the way the county operates, we have our 5% requirement, as we just talked about. We have an unofficial requirement of 10%. I'm not sure how much higher we could or should necessarily go. If we were to, let me add it this way. The infrastructure that we're basically talking about, that you asked about, that is almost entirely infrastructure in the capital budget. And that budget is about $6 billion and looks over a 6-year period. So it is incumbent upon our Department of Transportation and our schools and our rec department and government services to forecast the needs of our facilities. So they do that as part of their job, and they add that to the capital budget so that then we make sure that over a 6-year period, if we know a school has capacity issues or has mold or water leakage, we add that to the budget and make sure that it is addressed within that 6-year period. The operating budget and the 10% reserve level is almost exclusively for operating needs, which are within our $7.1 billion budget, everything from services to end and prevent homelessness, to food insecurity, to our library program and whatnot. And so I think the heart of your question is much more infrastructure and capital than operating. But the question then therein is, the more we raise that requirement from 5% to 10% to anything above, it does mean that there is less money in the operating budget. And so that would be a real trade-off and a real question. Did that answer your question, David?
Yeah, I didn't understand that there was going to have to be a trade-off between the operations budget and the amount you put in reserves. I mean,
Yeah,
it seems like you're able to make an operating budget that provides for a cushion.
So David, when we talk about reserves in local government, what we're talking about is for the operations of the organization, making sure that it can continue in an emergency. We're not talking about the kind of things that Evan's talking about, which is the capital, the air conditioning unit on the roof and the roof itself and those kinds of things that a condo is. I served on a condo board when I lived in Florida. Different kind of reserve than the city reserves, municipal reserves, government reserves.
Right.
So.
Right.
Well, so I'll use this. I got to jump, but I'll say this to the point that you all just raised. You know, I've been president of 2 civic associations. I've served on boards. I've been chair. I've been executive director of nonprofits, and now I serve on the council. The one thing that I never accepted when asked to do is to serve on my HOA when I lived in a condo. So David, bless your heart for your leadership in your HOA. That is the toughest level of politics.
Sure.
Because it is neighbor to neighbor fighting over colors and other things. So I appreciate you there. And I appreciate all of you for serving on the Charter Review Commission. Please reach out to me personally, individually, if you want to probe my thoughts or elicit thoughts on any of these things or anything else. You should always be having these conversations. These are great. I'd encourage you to invite Council President Stewart and talk to the county executive because your work is important. And with that, I'm going to start getting ready and head over to Annapolis today. But I appreciate you all and have a happy new year, okay?
Thank you.
Thanks, Evan. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good luck.
Okay. So I think we got pretty much everything we wanted to talk about in. I think after we hear from our Civic Federation at our next meeting, it is now planned for our next meeting. If we want to circle back on issues they raise with him, that's easy enough to do. I can do that, and we can do that. I'm not sure if it's necessary or not, but we'll find out. So that takes us into our next agenda item. Well, actually, let me just do approval of the minutes before I forget. We circulated the minutes of our November 13th, 2024 meeting. Does anybody have any proposed changes to the minutes as circulated? Can I have a motion to adopt them?
Move.
Second.
Second, okay. Hearing no opposition or changes, we will consider the minutes adopted by unanimous consent. Next item of the meeting is the Office of People's Counsel, and as I indicated in the draft agenda, the president of the Civic Federation is consulting with some of the folks in her organization, including someone who's an attorney, and she wanted to do a memorandum, but she didn't. She was concerned about writing stuff that was technically inaccurate from a legal perspective, and she asked me if she could have some more time. She had told me she would have it ready for this meeting, but she wasn't able to do that, so I don't have anything to circulate. But she assured me she will get it done in time to circulate in the next couple of weeks, so that we will have it well in advance of our next meeting and folks will have a chance to read it. And then when we come to our meeting, she will appear and be prepared to elaborate on the memo and answer questions on the memo. So I think we'll have a pretty full discussion with that background. And I will send it to you all via email as soon as I get it. I will not hold it for the agenda. I will circulate it when I get it. I did put the two topics on our agenda that we have members and work groups studying to give the folks who are working on this a chance to either update us or tell us what they've learned in the interim. If you don't have anything additional from what we already discussed today, that's fine. We'll just move on. But let's start with the special taxing district issue. This is Mike's chance to give us a report on his work group, if there is one. Mike, do you have anything?
Jim, thank you. No, it was a very good conversation, I thought, with Councilmember Glass today. I appreciate you raising it and his comments. I think the next step really is to have a representative from the executive's office meet with us. We're doing, some additional research, but it's a topic that, it's a question as to whether this really is a requirement to have the charter change, an amendment to the charter changed or not. It seems like it, obviously there are special taxing districts in Montgomery County that are operating, and maybe some more that they're going to be established, but whether it will involve the charter, is a kind of a separate question, is an open question right now. So I have nothing, bottom line, I have nothing else to add at this point. I thought it was a very good conversation today.
If you don't have a specific person in mind in the executive's office, I will reach out to Dale Tibbetts, who I thought might be here this morning.
Yeah, that would be great. That would be great.
He might not have gotten the word. When Christine and I let everybody know yesterday that we were moving to virtual rather than in person, I actually forgot to let him know because he's one of our frequent attendees. I probably should have done that. So I don't know. Hopefully he's not sitting in the council office building this morning. And so he might be the first person to ask as to who the right connection is. So I'll do that.
Mr. Chair, just wanted to note, this is Christine, just wanted to note, I have reached out to the Director of Strategic, might be getting her title wrong, Strategic Relationships, I think, Ms. Tricia Swanson, in the County Executive's office. And I've also checked with Craig Howard in the County Central staff about who the appropriate people would be. And I apologize, this is on me. I didn't reach out to them until probably like last week. And so I haven't heard back from them yet who are the appropriate people, but I can follow up with them as well. Maybe a two-pronged approach. If you want to contact Mr. Tibbetts as well, that's great.
No, I think I'll leave, if you've got that request in, I think I'll leave Dale alone.
Okay, so I will follow up on that and then get back to all the commissioners once I have folks identified.
Great, thank you so much. That's so helpful. All right, the next item on I put on the agenda for report is Commissioner Naftal's issue of budget reserves, and there was an attachment to the agenda with some data. And so I will turn it over to Jeff to lead us in that discussion.
No, I thought the conversation was good. I think, and actually David's question helped to distinguish between the two types of reserves, the capital reserves and the operating reserves. I think what we're talking about with this possible charter amendment would be operating reserves. So I don't have anything else to add beyond what's on the spreadsheet. I will take a look at more detail based on Evan's comments as far as when it can be used. I believe our charter does indicate, and I don't have it in front of me, but I believe our charter does indicate when it can be used, but it might not. And it probably should. So
I'm going to confess that I looked at your spreadsheet and had trouble figuring it out. And then I put my glasses on and I still had trouble. But before I get into that, so the way I'm reading section 310 is that it uses 5% as a maximum, which seems to me, and I understand Evan's concern that you don't want to take a charter and create an inflexible requirement that says you must have at least a certain amount at all times, because then you can't spend it down as you need it.
Well, but you give
Maximum, having
rules.
a cap seems to me is always more of a problem of flexibility. Someone says is because there's if you're going to keep to the cap, then you've limited your flexibility for emergencies. And it sounds like with a 10% goal, they found a workaround or a very ingenious way to exceed the cap. And so
Or nobody's calling them on it either way.
Well, yeah, that too. But it just seemed to me, if you're trying to make it make sense, you figure out what do we need to do to make sure that they don't need workarounds, that there's actually something that says, yeah, 5% is a goal, but you can exceed it for whatever reason, and just figure out what's the right way to do it.
So normally though, what you have is you have a goal of 10%, say, and you're allowed to spend that 10% in any way. You can exceed it anytime you want. You can have 12, 15 if you want, but you have a minimum of the 10, and then you're able to spend that 10 below 10. You can do 7 or certain. If you look, I think it's the state, one of the ones at the top of the spreadsheet has that. I'm gonna pull up the spreadsheet real quick here. So Baltimore County. So 10% of their general fund is the requirement, but they can go to 7% for no more than 2 years in a row. That allows for what Evan was talking about with a recession or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, and I can see, say, no matter what you do, you could always have a clause that says, if there's an emergency, they just override whatever the
correct,
whatever's in the law or the statute or charter. If you have an emergency, you vote by a supermajority to exceed the limits, for a case of emergency that you determined by supermajority. So you're okay.
Correct.
Well, the curious thing is that if you have an emergency, you're going to potentially spend that reserve down to zero.
You
may use all the money up.
In the ultimate,
you have to then figure out how to refill that reserve
Well, the answer is a
in
tax.
the next year's budget. So that the minimum or maximum has different effects in the way that you treat the amount of money that you have on hand. If you have to have no less than whatever, then you can't really spend all the money.
I mean, I think the key is it's economic policy making is not the province of the charter or the charter commission. The question is what's good governance, and good governance is flexibility when you need it, and you figure out what do we have to do to make sure the charter has the appropriate amount of flexibility so that they can make the economic decisions they want to make when they need to make them. And if right now it's sort of like the charter's kind of meaningless because they're not following it or can't follow it, and the answer is that make it meaningful by fixing it and making it flexible.
Mhm.
So I'm trying, I was looking at this, let me look at it again as we sit here. Tell me what your sort of big takeaway is from this chart.
I think so I was kind of focused on the bigger counties. It doesn't make a lot of sense to compare us to Hartford or Garrett or smaller counties.
So we're looking at Baltimore, Montgomery, Prince George's,
Anne Arundel,
Arundel.
Howard, Prince George's. Those are the big ones in the state.
Okay.
And so Prince George's, which I lived in and is not a well-run county, and they're at as of 2026 they'll be at 5% finally, which tells you that that's probably not a good thing for us to be at. It just, if it's good for Prince George's County, it's probably means it's not really a good thing. Baltimore County, like I said, they're at 10%. They can go down to 7% for no more than 2 years. The state of Maryland is at 7.5%. I just think 5% is too low. And I just think we need to figure out both the percentage that makes sense as well as the enabling language so that the county has the flexibility they need when an emergency happens. Because the whole point of having the reserves is an emergency happens, you need to spend them. You got to be able to do that, right? And it can't be, oh my God, that year you're only going to be at 3%. Well, that's because we needed 7% of the reserves in order to, or 70% of the reserves in order to get done stuff. So it's just a matter of wordsmithing and figuring out the proper percentage, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Do you read it the way I do, which is currently the 5% listed in the charter is written as a cap, not
Yes.
a minimum?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, which is really weird.
Which is really weird.
Because normally, like I said, I mean, you might set it at 5%, but if you happen to have the ability to put away 10% that year, there shouldn't be a reason not to do that, right?
Right. Well, I mean, part of it, I just keep thinking, this county's been around a long time. The charter's been around a long time. We were very small.
Well, but there's a key language in section 310, which it says with respect to the general fund. The general fund is separate. There's different funds. There's different enterprises, and so the capital.
All of these on the spreadsheet are general fund. They're all
general fund.
They're all general fund.
Okay, but there could be a capital fund. There's other funds. I don't.
Those usually don't have caps. Usually
Right,
those
right.
have, because a lot of what they do is related to capital. So you need to be able to cover new pipes. If your water line breaks, you need to be able to place it.
Right. But my point is the 5% cap only applies to the general fund.
Right. Well, I think, Mike, your point is a good point, and I think I didn't want to ask this on the record, but I'm suspecting that that's how they've gotten from 5 to 10. Is they put the 5 in the general, and they have the remaining 5 to make up the 10 somewhere else.
Exactly. Exactly.
I wouldn't want to pin down on that. I didn't think that was appropriate.
But
That's why it's better to fix it.
yeah, Jeff, could you clarify this though? With the larger counties, is that all that information is codified in their charter in some way, so it's very clear?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Some of them where you can see where like budgeted reserve amount where it says none identified,
Yes.
I couldn't find anything. So either they don't have it or it's not in the charter.
Okay.
So
But if you view it this,
All right.
this is
Thank
that
you.
the charter, if you view it as the charter only deals with the general fund, then effectively you have no cap, right? Because you can put it anywhere else.
mhm.
And there's no, the charter has no minimum, so you have a zero minimum and a zero cap essentially in the current charter.
For everything else besides the general fund, yes.
Can I say that it appears then that Baltimore has an interesting solution, and that is if there was a truly catastrophic year and you had to spend a large amount of that reserve, that you in essence give yourself a 2-year cushion to start to
Mhm.
build the balance back up. That you don't have to try in the next budget year to make up the entire reserve amount, but that you are able to walk up to that appropriate amount in potentially 2 or 3 years. Like, again, a measure of flexibility that we may want to think about somehow stating in the charter.
Mhm.
Okay, any other comments? Okay, does anybody else have any other topics they wanted to raise today before I go to the staff and see if they have anything?
If I could, we had discussed having listening sessions. And we haven't had any yet. And I'm wondering the status of the outreach to the various neighborhood commissions or whatever they're called, and how
Okay,
that's
so
progressing.
I've done that. Yeah, I've done that. I was thinking that, I'm not concerned about that because one, we have a lot of time, but also because I thought it would be better to have some of these topics fleshed out first. So that when we have those listening sessions, we actually have topics on the table. Because I'll tell you what our experience was last year when I did this. So I have reached out to all of the 5 regional service centers directors and asked them to please forward this request. They have this odd thing where they have the chairs of their citizens advisory boards named on their websites, but don't give any contact information for these people. They ask that you go through the director. So I did do that. I went through the directors and asked them to please forward to their advisory board chairs and please give me their direct contact information. A friend of mine who sat on one of the advisory boards actually did give me the name of one of them, so I did reach out directly to one. I have gotten one response back where the director said, "Yeah, I'm copying my advisory board chairs and vice chairs directly so they can be in touch with you." That's as far as I've gotten. I haven't gotten any other responses, but my email asked them to do was please reach out to me so that we can talk about, how they can engage with their members on these topics before we come and listen to them, give them a chance to actually consider. And I raised with them the specific topics that were on our agenda for this morning. I did say, these are the 4 things we're currently studying. We'd like to have a discussion with you on these or anything else that's of importance to them. And then get back to me on, when you're ready to have 1 or 2 or 3 of our members come to your meeting and have a face-to-face with them and put it on your agenda. So we'll see how long it takes them to get back to me. If I don't hear within some reasonable time, I'll follow up with and try to follow up with another email to see if we're making any progress. But I am hoping that if we do come to one of their meetings, they actually have something to say, that it's not just a cold staring session where they don't have anything to say, but we'll see. I mean, I think we found with our last listening sessions, when you put topics on the agenda, people will come out to say what they think about them. If you just say we're soliciting ideas, which we did a year ago, last November, we did a press release that we're just soliciting ideas without telling them what we're studying. You get very little back in return. We got very little back that way. So that's where that stands. Any questions on that? Okay. Staff comments. Anything staff wants to raise today or inform us about?
I don't have any comments. I will follow up regarding identifying the executive and/or council staff who can provide input.
Okay. All right, and Evan did mention a couple times reaching out to Keith Stewart. We have done that. Staff has put a proposal out to Councilmember Stewart's office, and I think we were just waiting to get past the first of the year. She just took office December, whatever it was, first week of December. So
Right.
I'll
I'll follow up with her office as well.
It probably won't be February, and we do have a speaker for February, but I'm sure by March she'll probably be ready to talk to us. And then I think the question is whether, Christine, whether you feel all the council members, including our new Vice President, Joando, whether they all are sort of already aware they're welcome to come and speak, or whether we do need to have a specific request or invitation to others, or whether or not you just think it's not necessary. What do you think?
I would recommend extending a more, it doesn't have to be super formal, but I would recommend extending an invitation to them, just because as you noted, I mean, they have so many things on their calendars. It might kind of spur them to action and to be able to maybe fit this into their agendas. So I would suggest it. Certainly can't hurt.
All right, so what do you think the best way to do that would be?
I would suggest maybe if you want to, draft an email version of an invitation, and I can forward it on to you. Onto all of the chiefs of staff.
Okay.
And or I can give you the, email addresses for each chief of staff and have you do that. But I have like a listserv. It's easy for me to forward it if you would like to
I'd be glad
come
to
up
do
with the
that way.
message.
That way's fine, and I think that they'll answer your email long before they'll answer mine, so I think that's good. Okay. Listen, we all get too many emails, and your first thing you look at is the name of the person who sent it to decide whether it's spam or real. And they'll see my name and go, don't know who that is, that's spam. So your name they know. Okay, good. Okay, we'll do that. And since we're probably looking at April and later, that'll give them some time for scheduling. So, all right. Anything else anybody has before we adjourn? I hear a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, second. Okay, thank you. We are adjourned. Okay, see
Thank
next
you.
month.
Good
Thank you.
weekend.
Thanks, everybody. Okay.
Good meeting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.